She was a poor innocent young woman, marked by her virginity. On the other side, a cruel millionaire, willing to do anything to take revenge on the past. Forced into a marriage that felt more like a sentence than a union. If this story caught your attention, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. The smell of mold and desperation permeated every corner of the small house in the outskirts of Chicago, where Eleanor woke up every day, bearing the weight of a reality that seemed to crush her dreams before they could even blossom. At 22, she possessed a beauty that cruelly contrasted with the poverty surrounding her. Hair as black as the darkest night, amber eyes that reflected a golden light even in darkness, and skin that blended the delicacy of someone who still believed in love with the hardness of someone who already knew too much pain. That Tuesday morning, while preparing the fennel tea that was all that remained in the pantry, Elena watched her mother wasting away in the bedroom next door. Catherine, once a vibrant woman, was now just shadow and bones, consumed by an illness that the family couldn't afford to treat properly. Each labored breath from her mother was a cruel reminder that time was running out, not just for her. On the other side of the city, in the upper floors of a skyscraper that seemed to touch the clouds, Alexander Blackwood observed Chicago from his panoramic office. At 38, he had built an empire that went far beyond the businesses inherited from his grandfather. His companies controlled everything from construction firms to communication networks, and his name was whispered in both the corridors of power and the darkest streets of the city. Tall, broad-shouldered, and with an imposing presence, Alexander possessed eyes of an icy blue that seemed to see through people, dissecting their weaknesses, their fears, their deepest desires. That same day, the phone rang in Elena's house, with an insistence that cut through the morbid silence of the home. It was a lawyer, speaking on behalf of a client who preferred to remain anonymous. The message was clear. Mr. Vincent, Elena's father, was being sought for an urgent meeting about his outstanding debts. It wasn't a request, it was a summons. Vincent left home with trembling hands, not just from the cold cutting through Chicago's streets in that harsh winter, but from the terror growing in his chest. He knew his debts had accumulated beyond any possibility of payment. The small tailor shop he had inherited from his father had completely failed, and loan sharks weren't known for their patience or mercy. When the elevator doors opened on the top floor of the Blackwood building, Vincent felt his legs weaken. The white marble corridor led to an office that looked more like a fortress of glass and steel. And there, seated behind a massive mahogany desk, was Alexander Blackwood, the man he had tried to forget all these years, the son of the woman he had loved and abandoned decades ago. Alexander didn't stand when Vincent entered. His blue eyes remained fixed on the man before him, studying every aged feature, every mark that time and remorse had etched into that face. For a moment it was as if time reversed, and he was once again that 10-year-old boy, watching his mother Clarissa cry every night for the man who had seduced her, impregnated her, and then simply disappeared from her life. "Sit down, Vincent," said Alexander, his voice carrying a coldness that made the air in the room seem even more frigid. "We have much to discuss." Vincent obeyed, feeling the leather of the armchair stick to his sweaty back. He knew this meeting wasn't a coincidence. He knew that somehow his past had finally come to collect its price. "Your debts total approximately $800,000, continued Alexander, leafing through a thick folder full of documents, "a sum that you obviously don't have, and never will. Your creditors are impatient. Some of them are people who don't usually take no for an answer." The words fell like lead on Vincent, who closed his eyes trying to find strength to face the inevitable. But Alexander wasn't finished. "However," the magnate's voice took on a dangerously soft tone, "I'm willing to not only settle all your debts, but also ensure that your family has a comfortable life for the rest of their days. $5 million, Vincent. More money than you ever dreamed of possessing." Vincent opened his eyes, confused. I don't understand. Why would you—" "Because I want something in return." Alexander rose slowly, walking to the window that offered a privileged view of the city. "I want your daughter, Elena, in marriage." The silence that followed was deafening. Vincent felt as if the world had stopped spinning. My daughter. But she's just a girl. She's 22, Alexander turned, his eyes fixed on the trembling man in the armchair. Old enough to make her own decisions, although in this case the decision has already been made. By you. I can't. Vincent tried to stand, but his legs wouldn't obey. She doesn't deserve this. She's never done anything wrong. Alexander smiled, but there wasn't a trace of humor in his expression. No, Vincent, you're the one who did. Something wrong, and it's time to pay. Deadline for your answer until tomorrow at 6 o'clock. After that, other collection methods will be employed. When Vincent arrived home that night, Elena immediately noticed that something terrible had happened. Her father, always a man with posture bent by the weight of life, now seemed completely shattered. For hours he remained silent, staring at nothing, until he finally found the courage to tell his daughter about the proposal he had received. Elena listened in silence, feeling each word like a stab. When her father finished speaking, she looked at the room where her mother slept, hearing her labored breathing, and knew there was no choice. There had never been a choice. "I'll do it," she said, her voice firm despite the tears beginning to run down her face. "I'll marry him." The days that followed Elena's decision passed like a blur of mechanical preparations and heavy silences. The modest house in the suburbs was invaded by strangers sent by Alexander, seamstresses taking measurements for a dress she would never choose, beauty consultants talking about hairstyles and makeup as if she were a doll being prepared for display, lawyers explaining contractual terms that sounded more like a life sentence. Elena observed it all with an almost ethereal detachment, as if she were watching the preparation for her own funeral. Her mother, Catherine, in the few moments of lucidity her illness allowed, held her hand with surprising strength and whispered pleas for forgiveness that broke her daughter's heart. Vincent, meanwhile, had transformed into an even sadder shadow, avoiding his daughter's gaze whenever possible. "He wants to meet you before the wedding," announced one of the lawyers on a rainy afternoon, 3 days before the ceremony. "Dinner tomorrow at 8 at the Carlton restaurant. A driver will come to pick you up." Eleanor just nodded, as she had done with everything else in recent weeks. There was no room for preferences, desires, or fears. There was only the inevitable. The next evening, she dressed in one of the simple dresses she owned, a discreet black one she had bought for her grandfather's funeral 2 years before. She had no jewelry, just a small silver crucifix that had belonged to her grandmother. When the driver rang the doorbell, she took a deep breath, kissed her mother's feverish forehead, and left to meet her future. The restaurant was everything she imagined it would be. Soft lights, gleaming crystals, waiters moving like silent ghosts between tables, occupied by people who seemed to belong to a completely different world than hers. Elena was led to a reserved table at the back of the room, where Alexander was already waiting for her. Seeing him in person was like being punched in the stomach. All the newspaper photos she had seen didn't do justice to the man's imposing presence. Alexander stood when she approached, his blue eyes scanning every detail of her face, with an intensity that made her feel as if she were being evaluated, catalogued, priced. "Elena," he said simply, extending his hand to greet her. The touch was brief, but she felt the contained strength in those long fingers. The surprisingly warm temperature of skin she imagined would be cold as ice. They sat in silence. Alexander ordered the most expensive wine on the menu without consulting her, chose sophisticated dishes whose names she could barely pronounce. Throughout the meal, he talked about business, about trips he took around the world, about properties he owned in different countries. Elena listened to everything in silence, eating mechanically food that had no taste. "You don't talk much," Alexander observed when the waiter served coffee. "I don't have much to say," Elena replied, finally, finding her voice. "At least not about the world you're talking about." Alexander tilted his head, studying her. "And what world would you talk about?" Elena looked directly at him for the first time that night. "About the world where people work 16 hours a day and still can't afford decent medical treatment for their mother. About the world where girls are sold to pay debts they didn't make. about the real world, Mr. Blackwood. For a moment, something passed through Alexander's eyes. Surprise, perhaps even admiration. But it lasted only an instant before being replaced by the usual cold mask. "In 3 days you will no longer be part of that world," he said, his voice low and controlled. "You'll be my wife, and I expect you to behave as such." "And what exactly does that mean?" Elena didn't lower her gaze. Alexander leaned slightly toward her. "It means you'll belong to me, completely. Your body, your life, your decisions, everything will be mine." Elena felt a chill run down her spine but kept her composure. "My body, perhaps, my life, possibly, but my soul, Mr. Blackwood, that will never be yours." The wedding took place on a grey Saturday morning at the most luxurious courthouse in Chicago, followed by a religious ceremony in a private chapel that Alexander had rented for the occasion. Elena wore a white silk dress that cost more than her family earned in 5 years, but it made her feel as if she were wearing a shroud. There were no guests from her family. Her mother had been hospitalized in an emergency the previous night, and Vincent preferred not to attend, unable to face what he had done. On Alexander's side, only a few important business people, necessary witnesses to make everything legal and official. Throughout the ceremony, Elena kept her gaze fixed on a spot somewhere behind the altar, mechanically reciting vows that meant nothing to her. When Alexander slid the ring onto her finger, she felt as if she were being branded like cattle being identified by its owner. The kiss that sealed the union was quick, technical, empty of any feeling other than possession. Elena closed her eyes and thought of her mother, of the promise that she would now have the best medical care available. That's why she was there, for love, not for the man beside her, but for the family she was sacrificing everything to save. After the ceremony, they went directly to the Blackwood mansion in the northern suburbs of Chicago. The property was as imposing as she had imagined: wrought iron gates, perfectly maintained gardens, a construction that mixed classical elements with modern touches, resulting in something that impressed more than welcomed. Eleanor was led through marble corridors and rooms decorated with artwork that would be worth small fortunes until they reached the master bedroom. The bedroom was the size of the entire house where she had grown up, dominated by a king-size bed that seemed more like an altar of sacrifice than a place of rest. "This is our room," said Alexander, closing the door behind them. "Our house, our life from now on." Elena remained motionless in the center of the room, still wearing the wedding dress, hands crossed in front of her body. "And now?" "Now you become my wife." Alexander began to loosen his tie, his eyes never leaving her face. "In every sense of the word." When he approached, Elena didn't back away. There was nowhere to go, and she had learned very early that running from reality didn't change it. But when Alexander extended his hand to touch her face, she firmly held his wrist. "I will fulfill my part of the agreement," she said, her voice firm despite the fear she felt. "But don't expect me to pretend to feel something I don't feel. Don't expect me to be grateful for this." Alexander observed his own wrist caught in the delicate but surprisingly strong hand of his wife, and for the first time since he had devised his revenge plan, felt something he couldn't identify. Anger, admiration, desire. "I don't expect gratitude," he said, freeing his wrist and taking a step back, "but I do expect obedience." Elena smiled, but there was no joy in the expression. "Then prepare for a disappointment, Alexander Blackwood." And at that moment, in the tense silence of the room that would be her golden prison, began a silent war between two wounded hearts, two souls who had learned that love was a dangerous illusion, but who perhaps unknowingly were about to discover that even in the deepest darkness, a spark can still ignite the most devastating fire. The first days in the Blackwood mansion passed like a strange pantomime where Eleanor and Alexander circled around each other like two predators, studying the weaknesses of their adversary. She had established her own silent rules, fulfilled the basic obligations of a wife in the social role, appeared at formal dinners when necessary, but maintained an emotional distance that deeply irritated Alexander. Every morning, Eleanor woke, before dawn, and walked through the property's gardens, breathing the fresh air as if taking doses of freedom, before returning to the Golden Prison. Alexander watched from his office window, intrigued by her routine, by the way she seemed to find peace in the small gestures of independence he hadn't thought to forbid. The first major confrontation happened on a Thursday, when Elena announced during breakfast that she would visit her mother in the hospital. "You're not going anywhere without my permission," said Alexander, not even bothering to look up from the financial newspaper he was reading. Elena paused, with the coffee cup halfway to her lips. "My mother is hospitalized. She needs me. Your mother is receiving the best care money can buy. That should be enough. For you, perhaps." Elena set down the cup with more force than necessary, making the liquid splash onto the fine porcelain saucer. "For a daughter, it will never be enough." Alexander finally lowered the newspaper, his blue eyes fixed on her. "You're my wife now. Your loyalty should be to me, not to a past you left behind." "Left behind?" Eleanor stood from the table, her hands trembling, slightly from contained anger. "I didn't leave anything behind, Alexander. I was torn from my life like a plant being forcibly transplanted. And plants like that sometimes die. Sometimes they refuse to grow in the new soil. And sometimes..." Alexander stood too, his physical presence dominating the space between them. "They adapt and flourish better than they ever could in the poor soil where they were before." Elena laughed, but the sound had no joy. "Do you really believe this is better? This constant theater, this life where every word is measured, every gesture calculated, where people smile out of politeness and stab each other in the back for entertainment?" Something passed through Alexander's eyes, a shadow of recognition, perhaps even agreement, but he quickly recomposed the cold mask. "It's the world you live in now. I suggest you learn its rules." "And if I refuse?" Alexander took 2 steps toward her, invading her personal space. Elena didn't back away, even feeling the heat emanating from his body, the masculine perfume that mixed something expensive with something dangerously attractive. "Then you'll discover that I can be much more persuasive than you imagine," he murmured, his voice low, carrying a promise that was part threat, part seduction. For a moment they stood there, separated by only a few inches, the air between them charged with tension. Elena could see the small golden flecks in Alexander's blue eyes, could feel his breath brushing her face, and for the first time since the wedding, she felt something beyond fear or anger. She felt a primitive, dangerous attraction that frightened her more than any threat. "I'm going to see my mother," she said finally, her voice huskier than intended. "With or without your permission." Alexander smiled, but it wasn't a gentle smile. "Then I'll accompany you." The trip to the hospital was made in tense silence. Alexander drove his black Mercedes through the streets of Chicago with the precision of someone accustomed to controlling everything around him, while Eleanor observed the city passing by the window, noticing how everything seemed different viewed from inside that luxury car, more distant, less real. When they arrived at the private hospital where Catherine was admitted, Eleanor was surprised to see how much better her mother looked. The once cadaverous face had gained some color, the eyes were more alert, and she managed to sit up in bed to receive her daughter. "My angel," whispered Catherine, squeezing Elena's hands. "How are you? Are you being treated well?" Elena forced a smile. "I'm fine, Mom, and you, how do you feel?" "Like I've been given a second chance at life." Catherine looked over her daughter's shoulder at Alexander, who remained near the door, observing. "And I owe that to your husband." Elena felt a lump in her throat. It was true, Alexander had fulfilled his part of the agreement. The best doctors, the most advanced treatments, medications that were previously unthinkable for her family. Her mother was alive and improving because of him. "He's a good man," continued Catherine, lowering her voice. "I see it in his eyes when he looks at you. It may not be the love you dreamed of, daughter, but it's something. And sometimes something can transform into everything." Eleanor turned slightly and met Alexander's gaze. For an instant, his mask of coldness slipped, and she saw something she couldn't identify. Vulnerability, perhaps. Loneliness. But when she blinked, the expression had returned to normal. On the way back, Alexander broke the silence. "Your mother likes me." "My mother is grateful to you," corrected Elena. "There's a difference." "And you? Are you grateful?" Elena considered the question carefully. "I'm grateful she's alive and improving. I'm grateful my father isn't being torn apart by loan sharks. But gratitude isn't the same as happiness, Alexander, and it's definitely not the same as love." "Who mentioned love?" Alexander kept his eyes on the road. "That was never part of the agreement." "No," agreed Elena. "It never was." But as she spoke, she noticed that he gripped the steering wheel tighter, and a small, treacherous part of her heart wondered if that was disappointment she heard in his voice. That night, Elena was in her nightly routine, brushing her long black hair in front of the bedroom mirror, when Alexander entered. It was always like this. He observed her performing these small, intimate tasks as if he were studying a work of art he had acquired, but still didn't completely understand. "Why don't you try to escape?" he asked suddenly. Elena paused with the brush in mid-stroke, meeting his eyes through the mirror's reflection. "Escape to where?" "Anywhere. You're intelligent, resilient. You could disappear if you wanted to." Elena turned in the chair to face him directly. "And condemn my mother to death, condemn my father to being torn apart by his creditors. I'm not that selfish." "So, it's for them that you stay." "It's for them that I came," Elena corrected. "Why I stay, I'm still figuring that out." Alexander approached, stopping behind her chair. His large hands rested on her delicate shoulders, and Eleanor felt an involuntary shiver run down her spine. "And if I said I want you to stay for me?" he murmured, his voice carrying a vulnerability she had never heard before. Elena closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of his hands through the fine silk of her nightgown. "I would say that you would have to give me a reason to want to stay." Alexander turned the chair, making her face him. He knelt before her, a position that drastically contrasted with his dominating nature. "And if I said that you're the first person in 20 years who isn't afraid to challenge me, who doesn't try to please me or use me, who looks at me as if I were just a man, not an empire?" Elena studied his face, seeing for the first time the lines of fatigue around his eyes, the tension in his jaw, the deep loneliness he hid so well. "I would say," she whispered, "that this sounds dangerously close to the beginning of something you swore would never be part of the agreement." Alexander smiled, and this time there was something genuine in the expression. "Perhaps I was naive to think I could control all aspects of this situation." Elena raised her hand and, hesitant, touched his face. Alexander closed his eyes at the contact, like a thirsty man drinking the first drop of water after a long drought. "Perhaps," she said softly, "we both were naive about many things." In the weeks that followed that moment of mutual vulnerability, Elena and Alexander began a delicate and dangerous dance. It wasn't love. Neither would dare call it that. But there was something growing between them, something that transformed. Each glance into an unspoken promise, each accidental touch into an electric spark. Alexander began to include her in aspects of his life that he previously considered forbidden territory. He took her to business dinners, where she discovered that her natural intelligence and unique perspective on the world impressed even the most skeptical businessmen. Elena, in turn, allowed herself to know the man behind the cold mask, discovering that Alexander had a brilliant mind, a subtle sense of humor, and a passion for art that he hid from the world. It was during one of these dinners, on a warm December night, that Elena met Victor Reynolds. Tall, dark-haired, with green eyes that seemed to hold dangerous secrets, Victor owned one of Alexander's largest rival companies. When introduced to Elena, he kissed her hand with a gallantry that seemed to come from another century, but his eyes never left hers. "The famous Mrs. Blackwood," said Victor, his voice carrying an accent that mixed Chicago with something European. "I've heard so much about you." "I hope good things," replied Elena, immediately noticing how Alexander tensed beside her. "Only that you are much more interesting than any man deserves," Victor smiled, but his eyes turned to Alexander with a clear challenge, "especially this man." The rest of the night passed with Victor finding subtle opportunities to converse with Eleanor, always within the limits of social etiquette, but constantly testing the limits of Alexander's patience. Eleanor realized the game being played, but couldn't help feeling flattered by the attention. It had been a long time since someone had looked at her as if she were interesting for herself, not just as another man's possession. On the way back home, Alexander drove in silence, his jaw tense, hands tight on the steering wheel. Elena observed his profile, seeing the internal struggle he was waging. "Are you going to say something, or are you going to spend the whole night with that face like you swallowed glass?" she finally asked. Alexander glanced quickly at her before returning his eyes to the road. "I don't know what you're talking about. Victor Reynolds, the man who clearly has some history with you and who spent the whole night trying to provoke me to irritate you." Alexander laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "Victor is a parasite who feeds on creating chaos in others' lives. It's nothing personal." It seemed quite personal. Elena turned in the seat to observe him better. "The way you looked at each other, there's something between you two." For a long moment, Alexander didn't respond. When he finally spoke, his voice was loaded with an old anger. "Victor was behind the blackmail that forced my mother to withdraw from society when I was a child. He planted stories in the newspapers, spread rumors, destroyed her reputation just because she refused to marry him." Elena felt something cold settle in her stomach. "Your mother? The woman that my father—" "The same." Alexander parked the car in the mansion's garage, but made no move to get out. "Victor always had an obsession with taking what's mine. First it was her. Now it's me," Elena completed, understanding. "He has no interest in me. He's interested in using me to hurt you." Alexander finally turned to her, his blue eyes intense in the dim light of the garage. "And you? Are you interested in him?" The question was simple, but Elena could hear everything he wasn't saying behind it. All the vulnerability he tried to hide, all the fear that she might choose to leave this life, that she might choose another man. "I'm interested in being seen as a person, not as a possession," she answered carefully. "I'm interested in talking with someone who doesn't think my opinion is just an amusing curiosity. I'm interested in feeling alive." Alexander got out of the car and walked around to her side, opening the door. When Elena got out, he didn't step back, trapping her between his body and the car. "And me? Do I make you feel alive?" he murmured, his hands resting on her waist. Elena raised her eyes to meet his, seeing the raw need he tried to hide. "Sometimes," she admitted, "when you forget about trying to control me and just are." Alexander lowered his head, bringing his face closer to hers. "Eleanor?" "No." She put her hands on his chest, feeling his racing heart through the silk shirt. "Don't say whatever you're thinking of saying. Don't ruin this moment by trying to transform it into another form of possession." Instead of backing away or getting irritated, Alexander smiled, a genuine smile that completely transformed his expression. "You're right, as always." He stepped back, but offered his arm to her. "Come, I have something to show you." Alexander led her not to the bedroom, but to a part of the mansion she had never visited. He opened a discreet door that revealed a spiral staircase leading to a converted attic. When he turned on the lights, Elena caught her breath. The space was a painting studio. Canvases were scattered around the walls, some finished, others just sketches. The style was impressive. Strong brushstrokes, vibrant colors, images that captured emotions more than forms. "You painted all this?" asked Elena, walking among the works. "It's my refuge." Alexander leaned against the wall, watching her discover his secret world. "The only place where I can be just me." Elena stopped in front of a canvas that made her tremble. It was the portrait of a young woman with dark hair and sad eyes, holding a child in her arms. The pain in the woman's expression was so vivid, it seemed to jump from the canvas. "Your mother?" she whispered. "I painted it from memory," Alexander approached. "It's the last image I have of her before everything fell apart." Eleanor looked at other canvases, seeing the evolution of Alexander's art through the years, somber landscapes, portraits of unknown faces, abstractions that screamed loneliness and anger. And then, on a smaller canvas in the corner, she saw something that made her stop. It was her. Or rather, it was how he saw her. Eleanor painted with a golden light that seemed to emanate from within her, the amber eyes capturing not just the color, but the strength, the determination, the fierce beauty she didn't even know she possessed. "When did you paint this?" she asked, lightly touching the frame. "On the night of our wedding." Alexander was right behind her now. "When you told me that your soul would never be mine. That's when I realized that perhaps it was the opposite, that perhaps mine was already yours." Elena turned, finding him closer than expected. "Alexander, I know you don't love me," he said, his voice low and intense. "I know you probably never will. But you need to know that what I feel for you, wasn't part of the plan. It wasn't something I wanted or expected." Eleanor raised her hand, touching his face as she had done that night in the bedroom. "And what do you feel for me?" Alexander closed his eyes, leaning into her touch. "Something that terrifies me more than any business enemy or financial threat. Something that makes me want to be a better man than I ever thought I could be." Elena studied his face, seeing for the first time not the implacable magnate, not the man who had bought her as if she were merchandise, but just Alexander, vulnerable, haunted, desperately alone. "Show me," she whispered. "Show me who you really are when you're not trying to be invincible." Alexander opened his eyes, and she saw in them a mixture of hope and terror that deeply moved her. Slowly, he lowered his head, and this time when their lips met, it wasn't possession or duty that united them. It was something much more dangerous, much more true, something that both knew would irrevocably change everything between them. The kiss in the studio changed everything between Elena and Alexander, but neither knew how to deal with this new reality. In the following weeks, they moved around each other with a different caution, no longer as enemies studying weaknesses, but as two people who had shown themselves vulnerable and now feared the power this gave to the other. Alexander became more attentive without being possessive, bringing small gifts that demonstrated he was paying attention to her, tastes, books by authors she had mentioned, flowers from the garden she admired during her morning walks, small gestures that spoke louder than any grand declaration. Elena, in turn, began to gradually lower her defenses. She dined with him in the studio while he painted, asking questions about his technique, sharing stories from her childhood that he listened to with an almost reverent attention. She discovered that Alexander had an impressive memory for details and a peculiar way of seeing the world that she was beginning to find fascinating. It was during one of these intimate nights that Elena noticed something strange. Alexander was painting a new canvas, an urban landscape of Chicago seen from above, when he casually commented about a specific street in the north side of the city. "My mother used to pass by there when she was young," he said, mixing shades of blue on the palette. "Before she met my father, she worked in a small boutique nearby." Elena, who was leafing through an art book, looked up. "What street?" "Monroe Street, near the subway." "Why?" A strange chill ran down Elena's spine. "My mother also worked there when she was young. In a small boutique, she always talked about it." Alexander paused with the brush in the air, turning slowly to her. "Your mother?" "Catherine. She always told stories about the time she worked downtown before she married my father." Eleanor frowned, a strange feeling growing in her chest. "How old was your mother when she worked there?" 19, 20 years old, around 1985, 1986. Elena felt her blood freeze in her veins. The same time, the same age. She stood up abruptly, the book falling to the floor. "Alexander, I need to know, what was your mother's name?" "Clarissa Montgomery." Alexander let the brush drop, a terrible understanding beginning to form in his eyes. "Why are you asking this?" Elena began to pace back and forth in the small space of the studio, her mind working furiously. "My mother always mentioned a friend from the boutique, a beautiful girl from a rich family, who fell in love with the wrong man and disappeared." "No," Alexander stood up, his voice loaded with denial. It can't be. She always said this friend was like a sister to her, that her name was Clara. Eleanor stopped pacing, facing Alexander. Clarissa. Clara. The silence that followed was deafening. Both understood the magnitude of the discovery. Their mothers not only knew each other, they were close friends, which meant that the version of the story both knew was incomplete. "I need to talk to my mother," said Elena, her voice trembling. "I need to know the truth." "Elena, wait." Alexander extended his hand, but she was already going down the stairs. The conversation with Catherine was one of the most difficult in Elena's life. Sitting beside the hospital bed where her mother was recovering, she heard a version of events that shook everything she believed she knew about her own identity. "Clara was my best friend," Catherine spoke with a weak but firm voice. "She came from a traditional family, but had a rebellious heart. When she fell in love with Vincent, I tried to warn her that he wasn't the man for her. He was older, charming, but unstable." "But you married him afterward," Elena pointed out, confused. Catherine lowered her eyes. "When Clara disappeared, Vincent was devastated. He said she had run away, that she couldn't face her family. I had always been in love with him. When he approached me seeking consolation—" "Mom, what are you trying to tell me?" Catherine took a deep breath before continuing. "When Vincent and I got married, I was already pregnant, but not by him. Elena, the baby was from a previous relationship I kept secret." Elena felt as if the world had stopped spinning. "What relationship?" "With a young man from high society I met at the boutique. He was kind, intelligent, treated me as if I were a princess. But when I discovered I was pregnant, he disappeared. Vincent knew this when he married me, but agreed to raise you as his daughter." "Who was he?" Eleanor could barely breathe. "What was his name?" "Augustus. Augustus Blackwood." The world around Elena crumbled. Augustus Blackwood, Alexander's father. She wasn't Vincent's daughter. She was the daughter of the man who had abandoned her mother and had indirectly caused Clarissa's ruin. "Are you sure?" whispered Elena. Catherine nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I should have told you before, but when I found out you were going to marry Alexander— My God, Elena, you two are half-siblings." Elena left the hospital like a sleepwalker. The streets of Chicago seemed unreal. The sounds of the city reached her ears muffled. She had married her half-brother, had fallen in love with her half-brother. When she arrived at the mansion, Alexander was waiting for her in the main room. One look was enough for him to understand that his worst suspicions had been confirmed. "It's true," said Elena, her voice empty of emotion. "We are siblings." Alexander closed his eyes as if receiving a physical blow. "Augustus. Your father. My father." Eleanor laughed, but the sound was hysterical. "All these years, all this revenge, all this hatred, and in the end we were from the same broken family." "Eleanor, don't touch me." She backed away when Alexander approached. I can't even look at you right now." "We didn't know," Alexander tried to argue, but his own voice was broken. "How could we have known?" "But now we know." Eleanor headed for the stairs, stopping only to turn one last time. And that changes everything. That night, Eleanor packed her bags in silence. She wasn't sure where to go, but she knew she couldn't stay there. Not with Alexander, not knowing what they knew now. She was almost finished when she heard a soft knock on the door. "Elena, it's me." She opened the door to find Alexander on the other side and was shocked by his appearance, the red eyes, the disheveled hair, the expression of a man who had lost everything. "You're leaving," it was a statement, not a question. "I can't stay." "And where will you go?" Elena realized she had no answer to that. "I don't know. Anywhere that's far from here." Alexander entered the room, closing the door behind him. "Elena, please, we need to talk about this." "Talk about what?" She turned to him, her own pain reflected in her amber eyes. "About how we fell in love being siblings. About how this marriage is even more wrong than we thought. About how this Doesn't change what I feel for you, Alexander said, his voice low but firm. Elena stared at him, shocked. How can you say that? Because it's true. Alexander approached her, ignoring how she backed away. I know it's wrong. I know it's complicated. But I can't just stop loving you because we discovered we share a father who destroyed both our families. Alexander, we're siblings. Half-siblings, he corrected. And we weren't raised together. We don't have shared childhood memories. We have only this. What we built together. Elena shook her head, fighting against her own emotions. It doesn't matter, it's wrong. And what if it is? Alexander reached her, holding her face between his hands. And what if it's wrong, but it's true? And what if it's the only real thing we've ever had in our lives? Elena closed her eyes, feeling the tears finally come. I can't, Alexander, I simply can't. When she opened her eyes again, she saw that he was crying too. Then I won't stop you from going, but you need to know that, brother or not, you will always be the only woman who managed to break through all my defenses, and that I won't be able to forget. Elena spent the first days after leaving the Blackwood mansion in a small hotel downtown, trying to reorganize the pieces of her life that had shattered. The money she had was limited, just what she had managed to gather from her personal savings, as she had refused to take anything Alexander had given her. Each morning, she woke with the irrational hope that it had all been a terrible nightmare, only to have reality cruelly restored when she opened her eyes. It was on the third day, while having coffee in a diner near the hotel, that Victor Reynolds found her. Elena looked up from the newspaper she was pretending to read and saw him standing beside her table, elegant as always, but with an expression of genuine concern that surprised her. "May I sit?" he asked, indicating the empty chair across from her. Elena hesitated but eventually nodded. Victor settled in, observing her attentively. She knew she must look terrible, eyes swollen from crying, pale skin, hair tied in a careless bun. "I heard you left Alexander," Victor said directly, without beating around the bush. "News travels fast in this circle," Elena murmured, returning her eyes to the coffee cooling in her hands, "especially when it involves the Blackwoods." Victor leaned slightly toward her. "Eleanor, I don't know the details of what happened between you two, but I can see you're suffering, and I hate to see a woman like you being hurt by men like us." Eleanor looked at him, searching for signs of falsity, but finding only sincerity. "Why do you care? You barely know me." "Perhaps. But I've known Alexander for many years. I know what he's capable of when he wants something, and I know you deserve better than being treated like a piece in whatever game he's playing." "It's not that simple," Elena sighed, feeling the familiar weight of sadness settle in her chest. "It never is." Victor extended his hand, lightly touching her fingers on the table. "But it can be if you allow it. I have a proposal for you." Eleanor withdrew her hand, but not with hostility. "What kind of proposal?" "Work with me. I have several companies that could benefit from your unique perspective. You're intelligent, observant. You have a way of seeing the world that can be valuable in the business world." Victor paused. "And I can offer protection against any attempt by Alexander to force you to return." "He wouldn't do that," Elena said automatically, then realized she was no longer sure of anything. "Are you so sure?" Victor tilted his head. "Alexander Blackwood is not known for accepting defeats, Elena, especially when it comes to something he considers his." Victor's words echoed in Elena's mind for the rest of the day. She knew she needed to find a way to support herself, to rebuild her life independently of Alexander, but she also knew that accepting Victor's help would be like declaring war on the man who, despite everything, she still loved. That night she called the number Victor had left. "I accept," she said when he answered, "but I have conditions." "Go on." "Nothing romantic between us. This is strictly professional, and if at any point I feel it's being used against Alexander, I stop everything." Victor chuckled softly. "You still protect him, even after what he did." "So you have no idea what he did," Elena murmured. "And yes, I still protect him. I always will." "Understood. Then we have a deal." While Elena tried to rebuild her life working with Victor, Alexander immersed himself in an obsessive investigation of the past. He hired the best private detectives in Chicago to track every detail of the history between Augustus, Clarissa, and Catherine. He needed to understand exactly what had happened, needed to be sure about Elena's paternity. It was during one of these investigations that he discovered something that changed everything. The detectives found old medical documents of Catherine's, including prenatal exams that had never been attached to Elena's official record. And in these documents was crucial information. The dates didn't match. Alexander studied the papers spread over his desk, his heart beating faster as he understood the implications. If the exams were correct, Eleanor had been conceived at least 2 months after the period when Augustus was in Chicago, which meant, "She's not my sister," he whispered to the empty office, feeling as if he could breathe for the first time in weeks. But if Elena wasn't Augustus's daughter, then who was her biological father? And why had Catherine lied about it? The answer came in the form of a document that the detective found buried in the archives of a private hospital that had closed years ago. A birth record that had never been officially processed, showing information that made Alexander stand up abruptly from his chair. Elena's biological father was listed as D. Everett Montgomery, Clarissa's younger brother, who had died in a car accident shortly before Elena's birth, a young man whom Catherine had met through her friend and with whom she had maintained a secret relationship. Elena wasn't his half-sister. They didn't share any blood. All the anguish, all the separation, all the suffering had been based on a lie that Catherine had told to protect the memory of her daughter's true father. Alexander wasted no time. He drove straight to the office where he knew Elena was working. With Victor, the documents clutched in his hands. He needed to tell her immediately, needed to undo the misunderstanding that had separated them. But when he arrived at Victor's building, what he saw through the office windows made him stop. Eleanor was leaning over a desk, intensely discussing something with Victor, who was very close to her, his hand resting on her shoulder in a way that seemed too intimate. When Victor leaned in and kissed Elena's forehead in an apparently affectionate gesture, Alexander felt a primitive rage explode in his chest. It didn't matter if they were siblings or not. It didn't matter what truth he had discovered. Eleanor was moving on, was finding comfort in another man's arms. Instead of entering the building, Alexander returned to the car, the documents that proved the innocence of his love now seeming useless. Perhaps it was too late. Perhaps Elena had already chosen a different path. But what Alexander didn't see was Elena immediately moving away from Victor after the kiss, her expression making it clear that the gesture had not been welcome. "Victor, we've already talked about this," she said firmly. "Our relationship is professional." "I'm sorry." Victor stepped back, but his green eyes had a predatory gleam. "Sometimes I forget that your heart still belongs to a man who treated you like merchandise." "My heart belongs to me," Eleanor corrected, "and my decisions too." But Victor smiled in a way that made her feel a chill of uneasiness. "For now, yes. But people change. Their minds, Elena, especially when they discover certain truths about people they love." "What kind of truths?" "Oh, you'll find out soon." Victor went to the window, watching Alexander's car drive away. "Very soon." Elena followed his gaze and saw Alexander's black Mercedes disappearing in traffic. For a moment, her heart leaped with hope. Had he come after her? But then she saw that the car wasn't stopping, that Alexander had just gone away. "He was here," she murmured, and decided not to come in. Victor turned to her with a smile. That didn't reach his eyes. "Interesting, don't you think? What made him change his mind?" Elena didn't respond, but a strange feeling began to grow in her stomach. There was something in Victor's expression, something in the way he had timed that kiss exactly when Alexander arrived, that made her question whether her ex-husband's appearance there had really been a coincidence. "Victor," she said slowly, "did you know Alexander would come here today?" Victor's smile widened. "My dear Elena, you still have so much to learn about how this game really works." In the weeks that followed, Elena began to notice subtle changes in Victor's behavior. What initially seemed like kindness and professional respect began to transform into something more possessive, more controlling. He found excuses to work late when only the two of them were in the office. His hands remained too long on her shoulders when he leaned in to explain a document. His eyes followed her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. "You've been working too hard," said Victor on a Thursday night when it was already past 10 o'clock. "Why don't we have dinner together? I know a discreet place." "Thank ye, Hugh, but I'm tired." Elena organized the papers on her desk, avoiding his gaze. "I'm going home." "Home?" Victor laughed, but there was something dark in the sound. "That little hotel room you call home? Elena, this is ridiculous. I have a beautiful penthouse in Wicker Park with a view of the entire city. I could do—" "Victor!" Elena stood up, confronting him directly. "I've already said our relationship is professional. Just that." Victor's expression changed instantly. The cultivated charm gave way to something cold, calculating. "You're still in love with him, aren't you, even after everything?" "That's none of your business. Everything about you is my business now." Victor took a step toward her, his voice low and dangerous. "I've invested time and resources in you, Elena. I don't expect to continue being rejected indefinitely." Elena felt a chill of fear run down her spine. "Invested? You're talking as if I were a business." "Aren't you?" Victor smiled, but there was no warmth in the expression. "You came to me because you needed protection against Alexander. I offered that, plus work and security, but all protection has a price." "What price?" Victor came closer, forcing her against the desk. "You, Elena. It's always been you. Since I saw you on Alexander's arm at that dinner, I knew I had to have you, and now that he's discarded you—" "He didn't discard me." Elena tried to move away, but Victor blocked her path. "No? Then why hasn't he come after you? Why is he allowing you to work for me, to spend time with me?" Victor laughed cruelly. "Because he doesn't care anymore, Elena. You were just a whim, a way to take revenge on his father, and now that he's tired of the game, you're lying." "Am I? Then explain to me why, when he came here last week and saw me kiss you, he simply left. Her man in love would have come in, would have fought for you. Alexander just left." Elena felt as if she'd been punched. "You did it on purpose. You planned that kiss knowing he was coming." "Of course I planned it," Victor didn't deny. "I needed him to see that you were moving on. I needed him to give up for good." "Why?" Elena struggled to keep her voice steady. "Why all this elaboration?" Victor moved back slightly, but still blocked her exit. "Because Alexander Blackwood has something that belongs to me, and now finally I have something that belongs to him." "I don't belong to anyone." "Oh, but you do." Victor took an envelope from the inside pocket of his suit, "especially when you discover what really happened with your respective families." Eleanor looked at the envelope with suspicion. "What is this?" "The truth, my dear. The truth that Alexander hid from you all these months." Victor opened the envelope, revealing old photographs and documents. "The truth about why your mother lied about your paternity." With trembling hands, Eleanor took the photographs. They were old images, some clearly taken without the knowledge of those photographed. They showed Catherine, young, talking with a man she recognized as being Augustus Blackwood, Alexander's father. "Your mother didn't lie about having a relationship with Augustus," Victor explained with a soft but cruel voice. "She lied about when it happened. Their relationship lasted for years, Eleanor, years during which she was kept as his secret mistress." Eleanor turned over more photographs, seeing her mother at different times, always with Augustus, always hidden, always as a dirty secret. "And when she became pregnant with you," Victor continued, "Augustus rejected her completely, said he would never marry a woman of a lower class, that she should figure it out on her own. That's when Vincent appeared, offering to marry her and raise you as his daughter." "This can't be true," Elena whispered, but the photographs were. Too much evidence to deny. "Augustus paid Vincent to marry your mother," Victor showed old bank documents. "Paid for his shame to be hidden, and when Alexander grew up and discovered your existence, he saw the perfect opportunity for his revenge." Elena looked up, confused. "Revenge?" "Against the man who abandoned his pregnant mother, Against you, the bastard daughter who represented the father's infidelity. Victor smiled cruelly. Alexander never married you for revenge against Vincent. Elena, he married for revenge against Augustus and against you. The world around Elena began to spin. No, this doesn't make sense. It makes perfect sense. Why do you think the marriage was so easy to arrange? Why did he agree to pay all of Vincent's debts without batting an eye? Victor leaned toward her. Because he finally had the father's bastard daughter in his hands. He could humiliate her, control her, do to her everything that Augustus did to Catherine. Elena felt nausea rising in her throat. Stop lying. I'm not lying. And if you doubt, ask him yourself. Victor picked up the phone on his desk, dialing a number Elena recognized. Alexander, it's me. Yes, she's here. And now she knows everything. Elena could hear Alexander's voice on the other end of the line, tense, asking something she couldn't distinguish. Oh, she knows about Augustus and Catherine, about the payments to Vincent, about why you really married her. Victor smiled as he spoke. And she knows why you never came to deliver the truth you discovered about her paternity. There was silence on the other end of the line, and Elena felt her heart shatter with the silent confirmation. He's coming here, Victor hung up the phone. Probably to try to explain, to invent more lies. But you already know the truth, don't you, Elena? Elena looked at the photographs spread on the desk, at the documents that proved her entire life had been built on lies. She felt something die, inside her, not just the love for Alexander, but faith in her own capacity for judgment. Why are you showing me this? She asked, her voice empty. Because I want you to know exactly who Alexander Blackwood really is before making your decision. What decision? Victor approached again, this time managing to completely corner her against the desk. The decision to come with me, tonight, leave Chicago, start a new life where Alexander can never hurt you again. And if I refuse? Victor's smile became predatory. Let's just say you've discovered very sensitive information about the Blackwood family business. Information that can be dangerous for those who possess it. Elena understood the implicit threat. You're blackmailing me. I'm offering protection, Victor corrected. Against a man who destroyed your family for 2 generations. Against a man who used you as a piece in a revenge game you didn't even know was being played. At that moment, they heard the elevator arriving at the floor. Alexander had arrived. Helena looked at the door, then at Victor, then at the photographs that destroyed everything she had believed in. Choose, Elena, Victor whispered in her ear. Come with me now, or face the shame of discovering you were used by the man you claim to love. The elevator doors opened with a sound that echoed through the empty corridor. Eleanor could hear Alexander's footsteps approaching, could feel his presence before even seeing him. And at that moment, with her heart destroyed and mind confused by the revelation of so many painful truths, Eleanor had to make the choice that would determine the rest of her life. Alexander burst into the office like a storm, his blue eyes sweeping the scene. Elena cornered against the desk, her face pale and devastated. Victor positioned predatorily beside her, and the photographs spread like evidence of a silent accusation. Take your hands off her, said Alexander, his voice loaded with an icy fury that made the air in the room seem electrified. Victor smiled, but didn't move away from Elena. The knight in shining armor finally appeared. A bit late, don't you think? Elena, Alexander completely ignored Victor, his eyes fixed on the woman he loved. I need to talk to you. Alone. She's already heard everything she needed to hear, Victor intercepted, gesturing to the photographs. About how you used her to take revenge on your father. About how the marriage was just a cruel way to punish the daughter for Augustus's sins. Alexander looked at the photographs for the first time, and Elena saw something pass through his eyes, not guilt, but anger. Where did you get these? Does it matter? Victor leaned closer to Elena, his hand resting possessively on her arm. What matters is that she finally knows the truth about you. Truth, Alexander laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. Victor, you've always been a skilled liar, but this surpasses even your usual tricks. Elena looked between the two men, her mind struggling to process everything. Alexander, is it true? Did you marry me to take revenge on your father? Alexander took 2 steps toward her, making Victor position himself defensively. Elena, I need you to listen to me. I came here because I discovered something about your paternity, something that changes everything. More lies, Victor interrupted. See how he tries to manipulate you even now? Shut up. Alexander turned to Victor with a fury that made the other man back away slightly. And take your damn hands off her. Or what? Victor challenged. You'll hit me. Here, in front of her. Show Elena what kind of man you really are. Alexander clenched his fists but controlled himself. Instead, he took an envelope from the inside pocket of his jacket. Eleanor, these are the original certificates, your mother's medical exams, the truth about who your father is. Don't believe him, Victor whispered in Eleanor's ear. He's had weeks to fabricate any evidence. Elena took the envelope with trembling hands, but Victor tried to intercept it. Alexander was faster, grabbing Victor's wrist with enough force to make him hiss in pain. I warned you to take your hands off her, Alexander said calmly, but there was promised violence in his eyes. Elena opened the envelope, studying the documents. They were birth certificates, medical exams, dates that didn't match what Victor had shown her. I don't understand. Your biological father was Everett Montgomery, Alexander explained, his voice soft, contrasting with the tension in his body. My mother's brother. He died before you were born in a car accident. Catherine married Vincent to give you a name, but lied about who the father was to protect Everett's memory. Victor laughed disdainfully. Falsified documents. You have enough money to buy any evidence you want. And you have enough malice to falsify photographs, Alexander retorted. Show her the dates on the photographs, Eleanor. Compare them with the medical documents I brought. Eleanor looked more carefully at the photographs Victor had shown. The dates were blurred, some clearly altered. These photographs, they were modified. Elena, don't let yourself be deceived. Victor, Elena turned to him, her voice growing in strength. You manipulated all of this, didn't you? The photographs, the documents, even that kiss when Alexander came here. Victor abandoned any pretense of innocence. So what if I manipulated them? The result is the same. You discovered you can't trust Alexander Blackwood. Can I trust you? Eleanor asked, taking a step away from him. You who lied to me from the first day, who invented false evidence, who blackmailed me. I offered protection. You offered another prison, Eleanor corrected, her voice gaining a strength she hadn't felt in weeks. A golden cage with you as the guardian instead of Alexander. Victor, realizing he was losing control of the situation, changed tactics. Very well. You want the truth? The truth is that Alexander Blackwood is a dangerous man who destroys everything he touches. He will ruin you, as he has ruined so many other people. And you? Eleanor faced him directly. What would you do with me? That would be different. I would love you, Victor said, but there was desperation in his voice now. I would treat you like the queen you deserve to be. No, Eleanor shook her head. You would possess me, just as you believed Alexander did. You both see women as trophies to be conquered. Alexander, who had remained silent during this exchange, finally spoke. Elena is right, and that includes me too. When we got married, I thought I could control what I felt, that I could keep you as a kind of possession. But you taught me that real love isn't possession. It's freedom. Victor laughed bitterly. What a touching speech. And now, Elena, are you going to run back into his arms? Elena looked at Alexander, seeing the genuine vulnerability in his eyes, then at Victor, seeing only manipulation and anger. I'm not going to run back into anyone's arms. I'm going to make my own choices, based on my own reasons. Elena, Alexander began, but she raised her hand. I need time, Alexander. Time to process all this, to understand what's real and what are lies I told myself. She headed for the door. And I need both of you to leave me alone while I do that. You can't just leave. Victor blocked her path one last time. You know too much about my business, about Alexander's business. That's dangerous. Are you threatening me? Elena asked calmly. I'm stating a fact. That's when Alexander moved. In 2 quick steps, he was between Victor and Eleanor, his physical presence completely dominating the space. If you touch one finger on her, if you do anything that threatens her safety, I will destroy not just your business, but your entire existence. And that's not a threat, Victor. It's a promise." Victor looked at Alexander, seeing something in his eyes that made him take a step back. "You can't protect her forever." "I can try," Alexander replied simply. "And I have resources you can't. They even imagine." Eleanor observed the interaction between the two men, clearly seeing the difference between them. Victor threatened because he was weak and desperate. Alexander protected because, despite all his flaws, he genuinely cared about her. "I'm going home," she announced, heading again for the door, "to my mother's house, and I don't want either of you to follow me." "Elena," Alexander called when she reached the door, "the documents are real. You're not my sister. You never were." Elena stopped but didn't turn around. "I know, but that doesn't undo all the rest, Alexander. It doesn't undo the months of pain, the lies, the way we started." "Then what undoes it?" His voice was low, almost desperate. Elena finally turned, and Alexander saw tears in her eyes. "Maybe nothing undoes it. Maybe some things are too broken to be fixed. And maybe," she said, looking one last time at both men, "it's time for me to stop letting men decide my fate for me, even if they do it out of love." With those words, Elena left the office, leaving Alexander and Victor in a silence loaded with tension and unfulfilled promises. Alexander looked at Victor one last time. "If anything happens to her, you know me well enough to know there will be no place on earth where you can hide. And you know me well enough," Victor retorted, "to know I don't easily give up what I want." Alexander smiled, but it was a cold and dangerous expression. "Then let the game begin, Victor. But this time, you'll discover you've completely underestimated what I'm willing to do for her." Eleanor spent the following days in the house where she grew up, caring for Catherine, who had been discharged from the hospital and was recovering. The familiar and modest environment helped her think clearly, away from the suffocating opulence of the Blackwood mansion and the manipulative atmosphere of Victor's office. For the first time in months, she felt in control of her own decisions. It was while rummaging through her mother's old belongings, looking for more clues about her true identity, that Eleanor found something that would change everything. At the bottom of a box stored in the closet, there was a leather folder worn by time with documents Catherine had never mentioned. "Mom," called Elena, bringing the folder to the room where Catherine was resting. "What is this?" Catherine looked at the folder and her eyes filled with tears. "I hoped I would never have to explain this." "More secrets?" Eleanor sat on the edge of the bed, her voice loaded with emotional exhaustion. "Not secrets, my daughter. Inheritances." Catherine touched the folder with trembling fingers. "When Everett died, he left some things for you. I was supposed to give them to you when you turned 25, but with everything that happened..." Eleanor opened the folder, revealing legal documents, stock certificates, property titles. Her hands trembled as she realized the magnitude of what she was seeing. "Mom, these are shares in various companies, including some rivals of Blackwood Corporation, properties in different states, investments that Everett made over the years." Catherine held her daughter's hand. "He was more than just Clarissa's brother, Elena. He was a brilliant businessman who knew how to invest his money very well." Elena studied the documents, her mind working quickly. "According to this, I am a significant shareholder in Reynolds Industries, among other companies," Catherine confirmed. "Everett always said he wanted his son or daughter to have their own power, never depend on anyone." Elena felt a fundamental change happen inside her. It wasn't just about money or power. It was about choice, about having options, about never again being hostage to the decisions of men who thought they knew what was best for her. "Why did you never tell me?" "Because I was afraid. Afraid you would distance yourself from us, that you would discover you could have a completely different life." Catherine sighed. "And then, when you married Alexander, I thought maybe it was better to leave everything buried." That night, Eleanor called the lawyer whose name was on the documents. The conversation that followed confirmed her suspicions. She wasn't just the heir to a considerable fortune, but but also possessed voting power in corporate decisions that could affect both Alexander and Victor. While Elena discovered her true inheritance, Alexander was going through his own transformation. After the confrontation in Victor's office, he had finally understood that he couldn't simply demand that Elena return to him. He needed to prove that he had changed, that he had learned to love without possessing. He began to systematically undo all the agreements he had made with Vincent. He transferred ownership of the family home to Elena, settled all remaining debts without demanding anything in return, and most importantly, cancelled the marriage contract that legally bound them to each other. "Why are you doing this?" asked Vincent when Alexander appeared at his house on a Tuesday afternoon. "Because your daughter deserves to choose freely," Alexander replied simply. "And I want that, if she decides to come back to me, it's because she wants to, not because she feels obligated." Vincent studied the young man he had feared for so long, seeing for the first time not the relentless predator, but a genuinely loving man. "You really love her?" "More than my own life," Alexander admitted, "and that's why I'm setting her free." But Victor wasn't willing to give up so easily. When he discovered through his contacts that Elena had inherited significant shares of his own company, his obsession transformed into something much more dangerous. "How did you not know about this?" he roared at his private attorney in an emergency meeting. "The shares were registered in Everett Montgomery's name. They were never officially transferred because she never claimed the inheritance," the lawyer nervously explained. "But now that she's aware, she can vote against my decisions, can influence the direction of the company." Victor paced back and forth like a caged animal. "She can even force my removal from command if she forms alliances with other shareholders. What do you want us to do?" Victor stopped pacing, a cold smile forming on his lips. "I want you to find a way to invalidate this inheritance, and I want you to do it before she discovers exactly how much power she has." Meanwhile, Elena was discovering precisely that. A week after finding the documents, she was sitting in the meeting room of a law office downtown, surrounded by papers detailing the true scope of her inheritance. "Ma'am, with these shares, you have veto power over several important decisions at Reynolds Industries," explained the lawyer. "You can also significantly influence other companies where you own a stake. And if I wanted to use that power to, let's say, prevent certain corporate actions?" Elena asked. "Within legality, of course, you can exercise your rights as a shareholder in whatever way you deem appropriate." Elena smiled for the first time in weeks, not a smile of joy but of determination. She had spent months being manipulated, controlled, used as a piece in other men's games. Now, finally, she had her own pieces to play. It was that night that Alexander appeared at her house. Elena saw him through the window, standing outside the gate, clearly hesitant to enter. Instead of waiting for him to knock, she went out to meet him. "You cancelled our marriage contract," she said without preamble. Alexander nodded. "You're free, completely free. No legal obligations, no pending family debts, nothing that binds you to me or to any decision you made in the past." Elena studied his face in the dim streetlight. "Why?" "Because I realize that spending the rest of my life loving someone who is with me out of obligation would be a worse hell than losing her completely." Alexander took a step closer. "And because you deserve to have the power of choice that I took from you at the beginning. And if I choose never to see you again?" Alexander smiled, but there was pain in the expression. "Then I'll learn to live with that. But you'll know it was your choice, not my imposition." Elena felt something stir inside her, not just love, but respect. For the first time, Alexander was offering genuine freedom instead of a golden cage. "There's something you need to know," she said. "I discovered I have my own resources, my own power. I'm no longer the poor girl you bought for revenge." "You were never that," Alexander replied. "Not even on the first day." "No?" Elena tilted her head. "Then what was I?" Alexander looked directly into her eyes. "The only person who managed to show me there was something inside me besides anger and thirst for revenge. The only person who made me want to be a better man." Elena felt tears prick her eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. "Alexander, you don't need to say anything now," he stepped back. "I just wanted you to know that I'm free too now, free from the past, from anger, from the need to control. And if someday you decide you want to try again with me—" "It would be different this time," Elena completed. "Everything would be different. It would be real." Alexander began to walk away, but Elena called him. "Alexander," he turned. "Victor is trying to invalidate my inheritance. I found out today through the lawyer. He can't accept that I have the power to interfere with his plans." Alexander stood still for a moment, and Elena saw the familiar anger pass through his eyes. But this time, he controlled it. "What do you want to do about it?" he asked. "I want to destroy him," Elena replied, with a cold calm that surprised them both. "Legally, completely, definitively, I want to show Victor Reynolds what happens when he underestimates a woman." Alexander smiled, and this time there was genuine pride in the expression. "Need help?" Elena smiled back. "Actually, yes, but this time as a partner, not as property." "Partner," Alexander repeated as if testing the taste of the word. "I like that." And for the first time since they met, Elena and Alexander were on the same side of a battle, united not by obligation or manipulation, but by the mutual choice to fight together against those who tried to control them. The war against Victor began on the following Monday, when Elena appeared at the extraordinary assembly of Reynolds Industries as an official shareholder. The expression on Victor's face when she entered the meeting room, accompanied by her lawyer and carrying a folder full of legal documents, was one of absolute shock, followed by barely disguised anger. "Gentlemen," Elena addressed the other shareholders present, her voice clear and firm echoing through the luxurious room, "I've come to exercise my rights as the legitimate heir of Everett Montgomery and to question certain questionable decisions that have been made by this board." "You have no right here," Victor stood up abruptly. "This inheritance is fraudulent. These documents are completely legitimate," interrupted Elena's lawyer, presenting authenticated certificates. "And any attempt to invalidate or contest them will be considered criminal interference in succession rights." What followed was a legal and business battle that lasted 3 weeks. Elena discovered that Victor had been diverting funds from the company, manipulating contracts, and using illegal methods to harm competitors, with Alexander providing resources and legal connections, but always respecting that she lead her own battles. Elena systematically exposed each crime, each manipulation. "You have no idea who you're messing with," Victor confronted her one afternoon, intercepting her as she left the law office. "I have connections that can make you disappear." Elena faced him without fear, her transformation from frightened girl to powerful woman being complete. "And you have no idea what kind of documents I've left stored in safe places, specifying exactly where to look if anything happens to me. Besides," she smiled coldly, "Alexander Blackwood is no longer my husband by obligation. He's my ally by choice, and a very dangerous ally for those who threaten me." As if summoned by her words, Alexander appeared beside her, his physical presence immediately making Victor instinctively back away. "Problems?" Alexander asked calmly, but his eyes promised violence. "None that I can't solve," Elena replied, keeping her gaze fixed on Victor. "I was just explaining to Mr. Reynolds that threats don't work on me." Victor looked between the two, seeing for the first time that he wasn't dealing with a vulnerable victim and a possessive man, but with a partnership of equals who protected each other by choice, not by obligation. "This isn't over," he muttered, before walking away. "Actually," Elena called, making him turn, "it is over. Starting tomorrow, you will no longer be CEO of Reynolds Industries. The vote is scheduled, and I have enough votes for your removal." Victor's fall was quick and definitive. Removed from the company he thought he controlled, facing criminal investigations for his illegal acts, he discovered that underestimating Elena had been the biggest mistake of his life. She not only destroyed him professionally, but ensured that he could never threaten any woman the way he had tried to do with her. With Victor finally neutralized, Elena and Alexander found themselves in a strange situation, free from all the constraints that had originally united them, but consciously choosing to remain close. "What do we do now?" asked Alexander one night as they walked through the gardens of the mansion that Elena had decided to visit for the first time in months. "Now," Elena stopped in front of the fountain where he had proposed to her months ago, "we learn to really know each other, without contracts, without blackmail, without revenge, just Elena and Alexander, discovering if what we feel for each other can survive in freedom." Alexander approached her but stopped at a respectful distance, "And if we discover it can't?" Elena smiled, extending her hand to him. "Then at least we'll have been honest, but I have a confession to make." Alexander took her hand, interlacing their fingers. "What's that?" "I love you. Not the Alexander Blackwood who bought me, not the man who tried to control me, but the man who let me go when I needed to leave. The man who supported me in the fight against Victor without trying to take control. The vulnerable man who showed me his paintings and shared his fears with me." Alexander closed his eyes, as if the words were a relief after months of pain. "Elena." "And you?" she asked softly. "Do you still love me even knowing I can leave at any moment now? Even knowing I have my own power, my own wealth, my own choices?" Alexander opened his eyes, and she saw in them a vulnerability that deeply moved her. "Especially because of that. I love you precisely because you're strong. Enough not to need me, but still choose to want me." Elena moved closer to him, placing her hands on his chest. "Then maybe it's time we try again, but this time it will be different," Alexander completed, lowering his face toward hers. "This time it will be real." The kiss they shared was different from all the previous ones. There was no possession, no desperation, no fear of loss. There was only love, pure, chosen, free. When they separated, Elena smiled. "I have a proposal for you." "What kind of proposal?" "Marry me," she said, completely reversing the roles from their first meeting. "Not for revenge, not for debts, not out of obligation. Marry me because you love me and because I love you." Alexander laughed, a genuine sound of joy that she had rarely heard. "It's a very tempting offer, Miss Montgomery Blackwood." "Miss Montgomery," she corrected with a mischievous smile. "I decided to keep my maiden name. After all, I'm now an independent businesswoman." "Miss Montgomery," Alexander repeated, liking the sound. "I accept your marriage proposal, but with one condition, which is that this time the ceremony be a real celebration, with flowers, music, vows that mean something, and all the people we love present." Elena felt tears of happiness streaming down her face. "And our honeymoon?" "Wherever you want to go," Alexander said, softly kissing her forehead. "The whole world is open to us now." 6 months later, Elena was walking down the aisle again, but this time there was no sadness in her steps. Dressed in a gown she had chosen herself, surrounded by friends and family, including Catherine, completely recovered and radiant with happiness, she approached the man who had learned to love her, not despite her strength, but because of it. Alexander waited for her at the altar, his blue eyes shining with genuine emotion. When she reached him, he extended his hands, and this time the gesture was an invitation, not possession. "Elena Montgomery," said the priest, "do you take Alexander Blackwood as your husband, to love and respect him in joy and in sorrow, in wealth and in poverty, in sickness and in health, for the rest of your life?" Elena looked into the eyes of the man she had learned to truly love. "I do, and I promise never to let love transform into possession, care transform into control, passion transform into prison." "Alexander Blackwood," continued the priest, "do you take Elena Montgomery as your wife, to love and respect her in joy and in sorrow, in wealth and in poverty, in sickness and in health for the rest of your life?" Alexander smiled, and Elena saw in that smile the wounded boy who had learned to trust again. "I do, and I promise to love you exactly as you are, support you in all your choices, and never try to diminish your light so that I can shine brighter." When si They kissed as husband and wife for the second time. It was with the certainty that this time it was forever, not because they were bound to each other, but because they chose, freely and every day, to build a life together. Elena had learned that true power wasn't in being protected by a man, but in being strong enough to choose to share her life with him. Alexander had learned that true love wasn't about possessing someone, but about being worthy of being chosen by her every day. And so, under the blue sky of Chicago, two wounded hearts that had found healing in each other began to write a new story, not of possession or control, but of love that liberates, strengthens, transforms. A story that proved that even in the darkest beginnings,